Most of these stories don't sound scary at first. They happened on normal American nights. After midnight, when everything feels quieter than it should, people who listen to stories like these usually come back. That's why they subscribe, before the night feels too quiet. Story 1. Mile that never ends. I should have been home 20 minutes ago. That thought kept looping through my mind as I stared at the empty highway stretching endlessly ahead, swallowed by darkness so thick my headlights barely cut through it. This was Route 47, the same road I had driven 5 nights a week for the past 11 years. Every curve, every exit, every rusted guardrail was burned into my memory. But tonight, something felt horribly, impossibly wrong. The gas station attendant had looked at me strangely when I stopped to fill up around 11:30. His eyes lingered too long, his mouth moving like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. When I asked if everything was okay, he just shook his head slowly and told me to drive safe. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Not like a casual warning, more like a prayer for the dead. Now I understood why. I had been driving for 45 minutes on a stretch of road that should take 15. The same mile marker kept appearing on my right, mile 32. Again and again, I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks after a double shift at the warehouse. But the fear growing in my chest knew better. This was real, this was happening, and I had no idea how to make it stop. The darkness pressed against my windows like something alive and hungry. No other cars, no houses, not even the scattered reflective posts that usually line the shoulder. Just an infinite ribbon of cracked asphalt disappearing into nothing. My phone showed no signal. The radio produced only static, a hissing whisper that almost sounded like words if I listened too closely. I didn't listen closely. Some instinct, ancient and terrifying, told me that would be a mistake. My wife would be worried by now. Melissa always waited up when I worked late, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea and a book she never actually read. Our bedroom was directly above the garage. She would hear when I pulled in. Except tonight, I wouldn't be pulling in. Tonight, I was trapped on an impossible road that refused to let me go home. The fuel gauge caught my eye. Quarter tank. I had filled up completely less than an hour ago. The math didn't work. Nothing about this nightmare made sense, but that detail sent ice flooding through my veins. If the gas kept disappearing at this rate, I would be stranded out here in maybe another hour. Alone, in the dark, on a highway that shouldn't exist. I pressed harder on the accelerator. 70, 80, 90 miles per hour. The speedometer climbed, but the scenery never changed. Same broken white lines blurring beneath my tires. Same mile marker appearing every few minutes. Mile 32. Always mile 32. The number started to feel like a taunt. A cosmic joke designed specifically to break my sanity. That was when I noticed the car behind me. Headlights in my rearview mirror, distant but closing fast. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost cried. Another person. Proof I wasn't alone. Wasn't crazy. Wasn't trapped in some hellish pocket dimension that existed only to torment me. I pumped my brakes, flashed my lights, anything to get their attention. Maybe they knew what was happening. Maybe they could explain this nightmare. The headlights drew closer, but they never quite caught up. They maintained the same distance no matter how much I slowed down. And as I watched them in my mirror, something deeply unsettling occurred to me. The lights were too high off the ground, too wide apart, not like any car I had ever seen, more like the eyes of something enormous pretending to be a vehicle. I stopped looking in the rearview mirror after that. The temperature inside my truck began dropping. I cranked the heat to maximum, but my breath still clouded in front of my face. Frost crept across the inside of the windshield in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Almost like fingers had traced them. I wiped them away, but they returned within seconds, spreading faster each time. The cab filled with the smell of something rotten and ancient, like soil from a grave that had been opened after decades. Mile 32 appeared again, but this time, something stood beside it. A figure in the darkness just beyond the reach of my headlights. Humanoid but wrong in proportions I couldn't quite identify. Too tall or too thin or bent at angles that made my eyes hurt to process. It didn't move as I approached. Just stood there beside the mile marker. Watching. Waiting. I held my breath and kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to look, to understand what I had seen. In my peripheral vision, I watched it turn its head to follow my truck as I passed. More figures appeared after that, standing at irregular intervals along the roadside. Some faced the highway. Others faced away, their attention fixed on the impenetrable darkness beyond the shoulder. Each one was different, but all shared that same quality of rawness. That sense of being something wearing the approximate shape of human without understanding how humans actually looked. I started counting them to keep my mind from shattering. 14, 21, 37. They multiplied with each mile, crowding closer to the road until they formed a silent audience watching my endless journey. The radio static changed. Underneath the hiss, I could now clearly hear whispering. Multiple voices speaking in unison, saying the same phrase over and over. I tried to ignore it, but the words burrowed into my brain like parasites. Almost home, almost home, almost home. The phrase lost all meaning, became just sounds, rhythmic and hypnotic and absolutely terrifying. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. My eyes burned from staring at the unchanging road. Every part of me wanted to stop, to give up, to surrender to whatever force had claimed this highway. But some stubborn core of survival kept my foot on the gas pedal. Kept me moving forward even though forward meant nothing here. Even though I was running on a treadmill built from asphalt and darkness and impossible geometry. The fuel gauge read empty. The truck should have died miles ago, but the engine kept running, powered by something that wasn't gasoline. I didn't want to think about what didn't to want to consider the implications of a vehicle that ran on fear or desperation or the slow erosion of sanity. Then I saw the exit 33, right there ahead of me, clear as day. The green sign reflecting my headlights exactly the way it should. The off-ramp curving away from the highway in a gentle arc. I had never been so happy to see a number in my entire life. It meant the spell was broken. It meant I could leave this nightmare. It meant I was almost home. I took the exit without hesitation. The ramp delivered me onto a 2-lane road I didn't recognize. No streetlights, no signs, just darkness and trees pressing close on both sides. But it was different darkness. Normal darkness. The kind that existed in the real world. I could feel the difference in my bones. Whatever had held me on Route 47 had released its grip. I was free. I drove for 10 minutes before I saw the house. My house. There in front of me, exactly as I had left it 12 hours earlier. White siding. Black shutters, the porch light Melissa always left on burning like a beacon. I nearly sobbed with relief as I pulled into the driveway. The clock on my dashboard read 11:47. Impossible. I had been driving for over 2 hours. But I didn't care. I was home. I was safe. The nightmare was over. Melissa met me at the door before I could get my keys out. Her face was pale, eyes red from crying. She threw her arms around me and held on like she thought I might disappear if she let go. "Where were you?" She whispered against my chest. I've been calling for hours. I thought something terrible happened. I opened my mouth to tell her about the highway, about mile 32, about the figures standing in the darkness. But the words wouldn't come. They felt too big, too impossible, too much like insanity spilling from my lips. So instead I just held her and said I was sorry, that there was traffic, that my phone had died. We went inside together. Everything was exactly as it should be. Warm, familiar, real. I locked the door behind us and checked it twice. Then a third time just to be sure. That night I lay in bed listening to Melissa breathe beside me, unable to sleep. My mind kept returning to the highway, to the question that had been growing since I pulled into my driveway. The question I was terrified to ask but couldn't ignore. If I made it home at 11:47, why was the porch light on? Melissa never left it burning after midnight. She always turned it off when she went to bed. Always. It was her routine, as fixed and unchanging as my commute had been. I turned my head to look at her sleeping face. In the darkness, her features seemed slightly off. The angle of her jaw not quite right. Her breathing too rhythmic, too perfect, like something imitating sleep without understanding the small irregularities that made it real. And as I stared at her in the dim light filtering through our bedroom window, I realized with slowly dawning horror that I had never actually left Route 47. That exit 33 had been just another mile marker with a different number. That the thing lying beside me had been waiting in this house, in this darkness, wearing the face of someone I loved. Outside, somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of a highway. The endless rush of tires on asphalt. The whisper of voices carried on wind that smelled like exhaust and rotting earth. Almost home, almost home, almost home, but I would never be home again. Story 2. Gas station that stayed too quiet. I should have kept driving. That thought still haunts me every single night, sitting at the edge of my bed at 3 in the morning, staring at shadows that moved just slightly wrong. But on that October evening, somewhere along Route 50 in Nevada, With my fuel gauge kissing empty and my phone showing no signal, I had no choice. The gas station appeared like a mirage in the desert darkness. Bright fluorescent lights cutting through the night. Clean, modern, open 24 hours according to the glowing sign. Everything looked normal. Everything looked safe. That was the most terrifying part. I pulled my truck up to pump number 3 and killed the engine. The silence hit me immediately. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty desert. This was different. Heavier, like the air itself had been drained of sound. No wind, no distant highway noise, no insects, nothing. Just the cooling tick of my engine and the pounding of my heart. The lights inside the station blazed with that awful fluorescent intensity. Through the windows, I could see rows of chips and candy bars. A coffee machine, a register. The doors stood wide open, inviting. But nobody moved inside. Nobody stood behind the counter. Nobody browsed the aisles. The place sat there, lit up and empty, waiting. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The nearest town was 40 miles back, and I had maybe enough fuel for 10. The math was simple and horrifying. I had to go inside. I had to find someone, pay for gas, get back on the road before this creeping dread in my stomach turned into something worse. The pump clicked on when I swiped my card. That small mechanical sound felt like a gunshot in the silence. I started filling my tank, watching the numbers climb on the display, but my eyes kept drifting back to those open doors. The lights stayed bright. The shelves stayed full. Everything stayed perfectly still. 5 gallons, 10 gallons. The gas flowed, but the station remained empty. I told myself someone was just in the back, maybe using the bathroom, maybe doing inventory. People do not just abandon gas stations in the middle of nowhere with all the lights on and the doors unlocked. That does not happen. That is not how the world works. 15 gallons. The tank was almost full. I should have gotten back in my truck right then. Should have driven away and counted myself lucky for the free gas. But something pulled me toward those doors. Maybe it was the fear of my card getting charged without authorization. Maybe it was the desperate hope that another human being was nearby. Maybe it was something darker, something that wanted me to see what waited inside. I walked across the empty lot. My boots scraped against concrete, the sound sharp and wrong in the dead air. The automatic doors did not whoosh open. They just stood there, already parted, like a mouth frozen mid-scream. The fluorescent lights hummed. Finally, a sound, but it was not comforting. The hum was too low, too steady, vibrating in my chest like a warning. The interior looked exactly as it should. Chips arranged in perfect rows. Drinks lined up in refrigerated cases. A hot dog roller turning slowly, though the dogs on it looked gray and ancient. The register sat unmanned, the screen glowing with a blue idle light. A small television behind the counter showed static. White noise flickering across the screen, but no sound came from it. Just more of that crushing, suffocating silence. I called out, asked if anyone was there. My voice sounded flat, absorbed by the walls before the words could travel far. No echo, no response, just that horrible quiet pressing in from all sides. The coffee machine burbled suddenly, making me jump. Fresh coffee dripping into a pot. Someone had started that recently. Within the last hour, probably. But where were they now? I moved deeper into the store, past aisles of beef jerky and motor oil, looking for any sign of life. Any clue. That is when I noticed the clock on the wall. The hands pointed to 8:47. I checked my watch. Also 8:47. I looked at the register display. 8:47. My phone, despite having no signal, still tracked time. 8:47. But I had been standing in this gas station for at least 10 minutes. The numbers should have changed. Time should have moved forward. Fear crept up my spine like cold fingers. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with this place. The lights stayed too bright. The silence stayed too heavy. And time itself had stopped. I backed toward the exit, but my eyes caught something behind the counter. A logbook. Gas stations always kept logbooks. I do not know why I felt compelled to check it. Maybe I needed confirmation that real people had been here, that this place existed in the normal world. I moved around the counter, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my hand reached for the book anyway. The pages were filled with entries. Names, times, gas amounts. All normal, all routine, until I reached the last entry. 8:47. Someone named Michael Torres. Pump 3. 20 gallons. My name, my pump, my fuel amount, written in handwriting that was not mine. The entry was dated 3 years ago. My hands shook as I flipped back through the pages. More entries, dozens of them, hundreds, all at 8:47, all at pump 3, all for amounts between 15 and 20 gallons. Different names, different dates spanning back decades, but always the same time, always the same pump. I dropped the book. It hit the counter with a sound like breaking bones. The fluorescent lights flickered for the first time. Once, twice, in that brief darkness, I saw something move in the back hallway. Not walking, sliding. A shadow that did not match any object. A shape that seemed to exist in the space between light and dark. The lights came back on. The hallway sat empty, but that shadow had been there. I had seen it. And worse, I felt it seeing me. I ran, burst through those frozen doors and sprinted across the lot toward my truck. The gas pump was still in my tank. Still running. The numbers climbing past 30 gallons now. More than my tank could hold. Impossible. The display flickered, showing different numbers in rapid succession. 40 gallons, 50, 100. The digits spun like a slot machine from hell. I grabbed the pump and yanked. It would not release. Locked in place, fused to my truck. Fuel flowing into a tank that should have overflowed minutes ago. I pulled harder, panic making me strong, and finally it came free. Gas sprayed across my hands and the ground, cold and chemical, burning my skin. The lights in the station went out. All at once, total darkness. Then they came back on. Every light, blinding brightness, and standing in the doorway, silhouetted against that terrible fluorescence, was a figure. Not moving, not breathing, just standing, watching. It looked human. The shape was right. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but something about the proportions felt wrong. The limbs hung too long. The head tilted at an angle that should have broken a neck. And though I could not see its face, I felt its gaze. Cold, ancient, hungry. I threw myself into my truck, turned the key with shaking hands. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. I slammed the accelerator, tires squealing, and rocketed out of that parking lot like the devil himself was chasing me. Maybe he was. In my rearview mirror, the gas station receded. The figure remained in the doorway, perfectly still, watching me disappear into the desert night. The lights stayed on. The doors stayed open. Everything stayed exactly as I had found it. Waiting for the next person with an empty tank and nowhere else to go. I drove for 3 hours straight, not stopping until I hit Reno. My tank should have been empty after the first hour, but the gauge never moved. It stayed at full, completely, impossibly full, like the gas I had pumped was not gas at all, but something else. Something that did not follow normal rules. I sold my truck the next day, told the dealer I needed something different. He asked why. I said the fuel system was acting strange. He laughed and said I was getting better mileage than he had ever seen. The tank was still full. 2 weeks later, I saw a news story. A missing person case. Michael Torres disappeared 3 years ago. Last seen on Route 50 in Nevada. His truck was found abandoned at a gas station. Empty. Doors open. Keys still in the ignition. No sign of struggle. No explanation. They showed a photo of the gas station. I recognized it immediately. Same pumps. Same doors. Same lights burning bright against the darkness. The reporter said the place had been abandoned for 15 years. No owner, no staff. The power should have been cut off decades ago. But the lights stayed on. Always on. And every few years, someone disappeared there. I keep my tank above half now. Never let it get close to empty. I avoid Route 50 entirely, even though it adds hours to my drives. Because I know what waits out there in the desert. A place that exists between moments. A station that never closes. A hungry shadow that feeds on people who have nowhere else to go. And sometimes, late at night, I check my fuel gauge and find it still reading full. The gas I pumped that night never runs out. It cannot run out, because I did not pump gas. I pumped something else. Something dark. Something that keeps me connected to that place. The clock in my bedroom reads 8:47. It has read 8:47 for the last 3 hours. Time is breaking around me. The silence is coming back. Growing heavier. Soon, I think, I will have to return. The station is calling. It has unfinished business with me. Because I never paid. I never went to the register. I never completed the transaction. And that place always collects what it is owed. Story 3. Exit that doesn't exist. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. There are places in America that should not exist. Exits on highways that lead to nowhere. Roads that swallow travelers whole. And if you ever see mile marker 237 on Interstate 40 through the Arizona desert, keep driving. Do not stop. Do not even slow down. I learned this 3 weeks ago, and I have not slept through a full night since. It started on a Tuesday. I was driving from Albuquerque to Flagstaff for a sales conference. Nothing special, Just another boring stretch of desert highway I had driven 100 times before. The kind of drive where you put the cruise control on and let your mind wander into nothing. The sun was setting fast, turning the sky into this bleeding orange and purple mess that looked almost too beautiful to be real. I was completely alone out there. No other cars for miles. Just me, the hum of my tires on asphalt, and that endless expanse of sand and rock stretching out in every direction. The radio had lost signal about 20 minutes back, leaving only static and the occasional fragment of Spanish-language broadcasts that faded in and out like ghosts. That is when I saw the sign. It appeared so suddenly that I almost missed it. A green highway exit sign, exactly like thousands of others across America, except this one looked wrong somehow. Faded. Old. The reflective paint was dull and strange. It said exit 237, nothing else. No town name, no services, no gas station symbols, just those numbers glowing weakly in my headlights. The weird thing was, I had driven this route more times than I could count, and I had never seen that exit before. Never. I knew every truck stop, every rest area, every tiny town along this highway. Exit 237 should not have existed. I should have kept driving. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to ignore it and keep going. But something pulled at me. Curiosity, maybe, or something darker. Something that wanted me to see what was down that road. I took the exit. The moment my tires left the interstate, the world changed. Not dramatically, not in some obvious horror movie way. It was subtle, disturbing. The sound of my engine seemed muffled, like I was suddenly driving through thick air. The sky got darker faster than it should have, even with the sunset. And the temperature dropped so quickly that my breath started fogging the windshield. The exit ramp curved down and away from the highway, wrapping around a rocky hill covered in dead Joshua trees. Within seconds, I could not see the interstate anymore. Could not hear it either. The silence was total and suffocating. Just the sound of gravel crunching under my tires and my own breathing getting faster. The road was cracked and broken, like nobody had maintained it in decades. Weeds pushed up through the asphalt in thick clumps. Sand had drifted across whole sections, creating these eerie patterns that looked almost intentional. Deliberate. I kept driving. The road stretched on for maybe 2 miles, winding through increasingly strange terrain. The rock formations on either side looked wrong. Twisted. They cast shadows that did not match the angle of the dying sun. I started seeing things in those shadows. Shapes that might have been human, might have been something else. Then I saw the town. It sat in a shallow valley, maybe 50 or 60 buildings clustered together like they were huddling for warmth. But there were no lights, no movement, no signs of life at all. Just empty structures with dark windows that seemed to watch me as I approached. The creepy part was how normal it looked. A typical small American town. There was a gas station with 2 ancient pumps, a diner with a faded sign, a post office, a church with a crooked steeple. Everything you would expect, except everything was abandoned, forgotten, left to rot in this hidden pocket of desert that should not exist. I stopped my car in the middle of what I guess was Main Street. The engine ticked in the silence. I sat there for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do. Every horror movie I had ever seen was playing in my head. This was the moment where the stupid protagonist gets out of the car and walks into obvious danger. But I got out anyway. The air outside was wrong. Too cold for the desert. Too still. Not even the whisper of wind. And there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like old copper and something rotting. Something that had been dead for a very long time. My footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement. Every sound I made seemed too loud, like the town was listening. Watching. I walked toward the diner because it seemed the most normal place. The least threatening. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a rusty creak that made my teeth hurt. Inside, everything was preserved in this disturbing state of almost normal. Plates still sat on tables. Coffee cups filled with decades-old liquid that had turned into black sludge. The calendar on the wall was turned to August 1987. 37 years ago? But here's what made my blood turn to ice. The meals on those tables were half-eaten. Forks and knives were still arranged like someone had just put them down mid-bite. Like everyone in this diner had simply vanished in the middle of lunch. All at once, without warning, I backed out of the diner and into the street. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was wrong. This whole place was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I needed to leave, needed to get back to my car and drive as fast as possible back to the highway. But when I turned around, my car was gone. I stood there in the middle of that empty street, staring at the spot where I had definitely, absolutely parked my vehicle. The tire tracks were still there in the dust, but the car had disappeared. The panic that hit me then was like nothing I had ever experienced. Pure, primal terror that made my vision swim and my legs weak. I was trapped, stranded in a town that should not exist, with no way to call for help, no way to escape. That is when I heard the sound. It came from somewhere behind the buildings. A low, rhythmic scraping, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I ran, did not think about it, just ran toward the church at the end of the street because it was the biggest building and maybe, just maybe, I could hide there. My shoes slapped against the pavement. My breathing came in ragged gasps. And that scraping sound followed me, never getting faster, never slower. Just constant, inevitable. The church door was heavy wood, but it opened when I threw my weight against it. I stumbled inside and slammed it shut behind me, fumbling for a lock that did not exist. The interior was dark except for the last fragments of sunlight coming through stained glass windows that depicted scenes I did not recognize. Strange figures doing disturbing things. I pressed my back against the door and listened. The scraping had stopped. Everything was silent again. That horrible, suffocating silence that pressed against my eardrums like water. Then I realized I was not alone in the church. There were people sitting in the pews. Dozens of them, perfectly still, facing forward toward the altar. They had not been there when I first looked. I was sure of it. But now they filled almost every seat. My voice came out as a whisper. Hello. Nobody moved. Nobody responded. They just sat there in the growing darkness. I took a step closer, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. And that is when I saw their faces. Or rather, where their faces should have been. Smooth skin stretched over skulls with no features. No eyes. No mouths. No noses. Just blank expanses of flesh that should not be possible. I screamed and ran for the side door, crashed through it into the dying light outside. My mind was breaking, fracturing under the weight of what I had seen. This could not be real, could not be happening. But it was. The nightmare was real. I found myself in a narrow alley between buildings. The shadows here were thick and alive, moving in ways shadows should not move. I could hear things in the darkness, whispers, voices speaking words in no language I recognized. That is when I saw the pattern. On every building, scratched into walls, painted on doors, carved into wood, the same symbol repeated endlessly. A spiral made of smaller spirals, turning in on itself forever. And as I stared at it, the symbol seemed to move, to rotate slowly, to pull at something deep inside my mind. I tore my eyes away and ran again, through the town, past the gas station, past the post office, looking for any way out, any road that might lead back to civilization. But every street curved back on itself. Every path led back to the center of town. It was like the place had no edges, no borders. It just folded in on itself endlessly. The sun was gone now. True darkness had fallen. And in that darkness, the town came alive. Lights appeared in windows. Not warm lights. Not inviting. Cold, blue phosphorescence that hurt to look at. And in those lights, I could see figures moving. The faceless people from the church. But now they were everywhere. Standing in doorways. Looking out from windows. All of them facing me. All of them moving closer. I found myself back on Main Street. Back where my car had been. And it was there again. Sitting exactly where I had left it. Engine running. Headlights on. Like it had never disappeared. I did not question it. I ran for the driver, his door, yanked it open, threw myself inside. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I threw the car into drive and floored the accelerator. The tires spun on loose gravel, then caught. The car lurched forward. I aimed for the road that had brought me here and drove like something was chasing me. Because something was. I could see them in my rearview mirror. All those faceless figures standing in the street, watching me leave. The road seemed longer going out. Darker, the curves sharper and more dangerous. My speedometer said I was doing 80 miles per hour, but it felt like I was barely moving. Like the town was holding on, trying to keep me. Then I saw the highway. The beautiful, normal, well-lit highway. I nearly cried with relief. My car burst onto the interstate and I merged with the sparse traffic like a drowning man breaking the surface of water. I did not stop driving until I reached Flagstaff. Did not stop until I was in my hotel room with the door locked and the lights on and the television playing to fill the silence. That was 3 weeks ago. I have tried to find that exit again. I have driven Interstate 40 through Arizona 5 times since then, looking for mile marker 237. For that green sign that should not exist. But I never find it. It is just gone, like it was never there at all. Except I know it was real. I have proof. When I woke up in my hotel room that first morning, I found something in my pocket that had not been there before. A small, folded piece of paper. Old paper, yellow and brittle. When I unfolded it, I found that symbol. The spiral made of spirals. And written underneath in handwriting that was not mine. You were there. You will return. I burned the paper immediately. But it did not matter. The symbol is stuck in my head now. I see it everywhere. In coffee stains. In cracks on walls. In the patterns of frost on my windshield. It follows me. And at night, when I close my eyes, I hear that sound again. That slow, deliberate scraping. Getting closer. Getting louder. Last night, I looked out my apartment window and saw a figure standing under the streetlight. Perfectly still, facing my building. It had no face. I am telling you this story as a warning. If you ever see an exit that you do not recognize, an exit that feels wrong, keep driving. There are places in America that exist outside the normal world. Places that trap travelers. Places that change you just by being there. And once they mark you, they never let you go. I can feel it pulling at me. Even now, the urge to get in my car and drive. To find that exit again. To return to that town. It whispers to me in dreams. Shows me things I should not see. I do not know how much longer I can resist. If you are listening to this story and you recognize what I am talking about, if you have seen that exit or that town, please tell me I am not crazy. Tell me I am not alone. Because the worst part is not knowing whether the nightmare is out there or inside my head. Either way, I think it is almost time to go back. Story 4. Motel with no night staff. There are places that shouldn't exist, and yet they do. I found one at 2 in the morning on a stretch of Highway 49 that my GPS insisted didn't appear on any current map. You want to know what the most terrifying thing in the world is? It is not the dark. It is not monsters hiding in shadows. It is the creeping realization that crossed into somewhere that I ascend to quite right. And by the time you understand what is happening, it is far too late to leave. My name is Michael. I am a normal guy. That got a job, a mortgage, a life back in Denver that feels like it happened to someone else now. I was driving back from a funeral in Oklahoma when everything changed. My uncle's funeral, the kind of event that leaves you hollowed out and angry at the world. I'd been on the road for 8 hours, and I should have stopped much earlier. But I wasn't thinking clearly. Grief does that to you. It makes you do stupid things. The highway was empty. I mean, truly empty. Not a single car in either direction. The moon was full and sickly pale, casting everything in this eerie, bone-white light that made the landscape look like something from a nightmare you can't quite remember. There were no exit signs coming up. No promise of civilization. I was watching my gas gauge creep toward the red zone when I saw it. The motel appeared around a bend like it had been waiting for me specifically. Neon pink and green letters spelled out, Desert Rose Motel. In that vintage style you see in old photographs, the kind that makes you think about decades past, about things that used to matter. The building was 2 stories, long and narrow, with a separate office that glowed a warm yellow against the terrifying darkness surrounding it. There were no other cars in the lot. Not one, but there were lights on in some of the rooms, curtains drawn, suggesting people were sleeping inside. The office door was open. I need you to understand something about that moment. I felt watched. Not in a paranoid way, but in the way an animal feels it when a predator locks eyes with it from across a clearing. Every instinct in my exhausted body screamed at me to keep driving, to find another motel, to do anything but step foot on that property. But my truck was running on fumes, and the next town was supposedly 30 miles away. I didn't have a choice, or at least that was what I told myself. The office was small and smelled like old cigarette smoke and something else I couldn't identify. Something wrong. The desk was wooden, aged dark with time, and there were old photographs on the walls showing the motel in its heyday, maybe in the 70s or 80s. The pictures were so faded they looked like they were dissolving into dust. Behind the counter, there was a key. Just one key, room 217. It was hanging on a hook with a wooden diamond-shaped fob that had the number carved into it. Next to it was a leather-bound registration book, open to that night, estate. The page was blank except for one entry at the bottom in handwriting that wasn't quite steady. My name, written perfectly, with my address next to it. My actual address, the one I hadn't given to anyone. I stood there for what might have been 10 seconds or might have been 10 minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. Time felt slippery. I was staring at my name written in a hand I didn't recognize, trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. There was no employee, no manager, no human being anywhere in that building. The office was silent except for the hum of an ancient soda machine in the corner and the soft buzz of the neon sign outside. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear my breathing. Both of them sounded too loud, like they were echoing in an empty cathedral. The terrifying thing was that the key was already there. The room was already assigned. It was like someone was expecting me, like they known I would come. I grabbed the key and left before I could think about it any further. My truck pulled around the side of the building toward room 217. The motel looked different in the moonlight now, more sinister. The windows of the occupied rooms had their curtains drawn, and I didn't see any movement behind them. But I felt sure that people were in there watching me. Not sleeping, watching. The shadows in those windows seemed deeper than they should be, darker in a way that suggested they were filled with things that darkness could hide. Room 217 was at the far end of the motel, the last door before the building ended and the desert began. The key slid into the lock smoothly, and the door swung open silently, the hinges well oiled and maintained. The room beyond was clean, almost aggressively clean. The bed was made with military precision, white sheets folded tight enough to bounce a coin off. The furniture was basic but nice, nothing luxurious, nothing broken. The bathroom was spotless, but as I stood there in the doorway, I realized that the room was wrong in a different way now. It was too perfect. No dust on the nightstand, no wrinkle in the curtains, no evidence that human beings had ever actually inhabited this space. I sat on the edge of the bed, and the mattress didn't even creak. That's when I noticed there was no clock, no radio, no television, nothing that could tell me what time it was or connect me to the outside world. My phone had no signal. I checked it 3 times, walked to different corners of the room, held it toward the window. Nothing. It was as if the technology simply didn't work here, or as if this place existed outside the normal rules of the world. I tried not to think about the registration book. I tried not to think about my name written in that shaky handwriting. I tried not to think about how no one had come to check me in. Instead, I showered and lay in the dark, listening to the sound of absolutely nothing. Not a car, not the wind, not animals, just complete, suffocating silence. That is when the fear started to creep in. Not the immediate, adrenaline-fueled fear of something dangerous happening. It was worse. It was the cold, insidious fear that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I lay in the dark for hours, watching the shadows on the ceiling, and I became convinced of something terrifying. I couldn't explain it logically. I just knew. That office downstairs, that key on the hook, my name in that book. It wasn't real. Or rather, it was real, but not in the way it should have been. It was as if someone had staged the entire thing for my arrival. As if the expectation of my presence had somehow created the evidence that I had checked in. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had stopped working the same way. I began to wonder if I had actually checked in at all. If maybe I stopped at the side of the road and fallen asleep in my truck and dreamed the whole thing. But the sheets under my body were real. The mattress was real. The chill in the room was real. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake, and I was in a room at the Desert Rose Motel, and I had no memory of actually registering. Around 3 a.m, I heard something. A sound from somewhere else in the motel. Footsteps, maybe, or something being dragged. I got out of bed and went to the window. The parking lot was empty. The office was still lit up, still empty, still waiting. The other rooms still had their curtains drawn. But I heard the sound again, and this time I was certain it was coming from inside the motel. Multiple people, maybe, or something that moved like multiple people, moving slowly through the hallway, walking past room after room. Getting closer, I turned off the light and got back in bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like I was 6 years old again, like that would somehow protect me. The footsteps reached my room and stopped. I held my breath. I don't know how long I held it. I thought I might pass out. Then the sound moved on, continuing down the hall, the footsteps fading into the distance. I didn't sleep. I lay awake until the window began to turn gray with the approach of dawn. I counted seconds. I traced the shadows on the ceiling. I thought about my uncle. I thought about the funeral. I thought about death and what came after. I thought about things that moved through empty buildings in the dark. When the sun finally came, I was almost mad with exhaustion and fear. I got dressed and went downstairs. The office was still lit, even with morning sun pouring through the windows. It was still empty. The registration book was still open to the same page, and my name was still there, written in that same unfamiliar handwriting. But something was different. Something about the page looked slightly faded now, like it was aging in real time. Like the record of my stay was dissolving right in front of me. That is when I understood. I understood with the kind of bone-deep certainty that comes from something that isn't logical but is absolutely, undeniably true. I had never actually checked in. There had been no employee. There had been no transaction. The key had been waiting because it was always waiting. My room had been prepared because it was always prepared. My name had been written in that book by something that knew my name and my address and the fact that I would arrive at exactly the right moment, exhausted and grieving and desperate for shelter. I backed out of the office and walked to my truck. I didn't run. Running felt like it might break some kind of rule, like it might wake something up. But I moved fast. My hands were shaking as I got the key in the ignition. The truck started on the first try, which somehow made everything worse. Everything in that place worked too well. Everything was too smooth, too prepared. As I pulled out onto the highway, I looked at the motel in my mirror. Room 217, its door was standing open. Inside, the bed was unmade now. There was someone standing in the room, or something that used to be someone. I didn't see it clearly. I didn't want to see it clearly, but it was looking at me. I could feel it, watching my truck disappear down the highway. I drove for 40 minutes before I started to think straight again. I took out my phone. I had signal now. A full 4 bars. I pulled into a small gas station outside a town called Westfield and bought coffee I didn't drink. I asked the clerk about the Desert Rose Motel. She looked at me like I asked her about something impossible. The Desert Rose, she said. There is no motel out there. Not for 30 years or more. Place burned down back in the 90s. They found bodies in some of the rooms. Never figured out why those people were there or what started the fire. It was a real creepy place before it went up. The owner killed himself a few weeks after, they said. Didn't he handle the guilt? My hands started shaking again. I drove back immediately. I thought I was going crazy. I needed to see it again, to prove that it was real, that I hadn't imagined everything. The highway looked the same. The bend was in the same place. But the motel was gone. Completely gone. There was just empty desert and scorched earth where the building had been. A concrete slab, some bits of charred wood. That was all, except for one thing. There was a key lying in the dirt. The same wooden key fob. Room 217. I didn't touch it. I got back in my truck and drove for 6 hours straight without stopping. But here, it's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Here, it's the thing that makes me wonder if I am losing my mind. When I got home, I checked my credit card. There was no charge from the Desert Rose Motel. No record of my stay. It was as if I had never been there. As if my visit had been erased from every official record of the world. Everything except for one thing. My phone. I took a picture when I went back to look at the empty lot. Just to have proof that I hadn't imagined it. A photo of where the motel should be standing. When I looked at that picture later that day, there was something in the background. Just barely visible in the shadows. A room with a door. Room 217. And standing in that doorway, caught in the moment I pressed the button, was a figure that had no face. I'd tried to delete that photo. I'd tried 1,000 times. But it always comes back. Every morning, without fail. It is there in my phone. Waiting for me. Watching me. And I am starting to wonder if maybe I never left that motel at all. Maybe I am still in room 217, lying on that perfectly made bed, and everything since then has just been a dream. A beautiful, elaborate dream designed to make me feel normal until the moment I finally understand the truth. Some nights, I can still hear those footsteps moving through the hallway. Still getting closer, and I am starting to understand that the Desert Rose Motel doesn't exist in any particular place. It exists in the moment when someone like me, broken and lost and desperate, wanders off the main road looking for shelter. And it is always waiting. There is always a key on the hook. There is always a room with the perfect, sterile bed. There is always my name written in that book by a hand that I ascend to mine. And sooner or later, the person in that doorway will step forward. We'll walk down the hallway, and we'll finally reach the room where I am waiting. When that happens, do you think I will be able to leave? Story 5, last car. Have you ever been the last person in a parking lot late at night and felt like something was watching you? I have. And what I discovered that night still keeps me awake, listening to every sound outside my window. It started 3 months ago when I took a security job at Clearwater Mall, about 40 miles outside Tucson. The place had seen better days. Half the stores were empty, their windows covered with brown paper and going out of business signs that nobody bothered to take down. But the pay was decent, and all I had to do was walk the grounds from midnight to 6 in the morning, checking doors and making sure nobody broke in. The job was mind-numbingly boring. Most nights, I would sit in my beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot, watching Netflix on my phone and doing a lap around the building every hour. The mall closed at 9. By 10, the lot was empty. By 11, even the last employee stragglers were gone. Then it was just me, the desert wind, and 300 empty parking spaces stretching out under flickering yellow lights. But on November 7th, something changed. I arrived at midnight like always, pulling into my usual spot near the east entrance. The lot was completely empty except for one car parked way out at the far edge, near the dead trees that marked where the pavement met the desert. It was an old sedan, dark blue or black, hard to tell under those sodium lights. The engine was running. I could see the exhaust drifting up into the cold night air. That was strange. Nobody ever stayed past closing. I sat there for a minute, watching the car idle in the darkness. Maybe someone was having car trouble. Maybe they were on the phone. I decided to give them some time before I went over to check. 20 minutes passed. The car just sat there, engine running, headlights off. No movement inside that I could see from this distance. The whole scene felt wrong in a way I could not explain. Something about that lone vehicle in the massive empty lot, purring away in the darkness while everything around it was dead and silent. I started my first patrol at 12:30, walking the perimeter like I did every night. The wind was picking up, blowing dust devils across the empty spaces. As I walked past the shuttered Sears and the abandoned food court entrance, I kept glancing back at that car. Still there. Still running. Still no sign of life. When I finished my loop and got back to my Honda, I made a decision. I would drive over and check on whoever was in that car. It was part of my job, after all, making sure everyone was safe. I started my engine and slowly drove across the lot toward the mysterious sedan. As I got closer, my headlights swept across it, and I could see it was a Buick, maybe 15 or 20 years old. Primer spots on the doors, cracked rear window, the kind of car you see abandoned on the side of desert highways. But this one was not abandoned. The engine was definitely running. I pulled up about 30 feet away and put my car in park, leaving my headlights pointed at the Buick. I could not see anyone in the driver's seat. The windows were not tinted, just dirty, covered in a film of dust that made it hard to see inside clearly. But the cab looked empty. That is when the fear started. Real fear, the kind that makes your throat tighten and your hands shake. Because an empty car does not keep its engine running. Someone had to be in there. Someone had to be sitting in that driver's seat, hidden somehow, watching me approach. I sat in my Honda for a full minute, debating what to do. Every instinct told me to turn around and drive away, maybe call the police and let them handle it. But I needed this job. I could not call the cops every time something seemed creepy. So I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out of my car. The November wind hit me immediately, carrying the smell of creosote and dust. I walked slowly toward the Buick, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As I got closer, I could hear the engine more clearly now, that distinctive rumble of an old V6, slightly rough idle, like it needed a tune-up. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small and stupid in the empty lot. "Security, just checking if everything was okay." No response. No movement from inside the car. I was 10 feet away now. My flashlight beam swept across the dirty windows. I could see the interior now. Torn fabric seats, fast food bags on the floor, hanging air freshener, and no one in the driver's seat. No one in the passenger seat. The car was completely empty, but the engine was running. The keys had to be in the ignition. I stepped up to the driver's side window and cupped my hand against the glass, shining my light inside. Empty. Absolutely empty. Old coffee cups in the center console. A parking ticket on the dashboard dated from 2 weeks ago. A rosary hanging from the rearview mirror. But no person. No explanation for why this car was sitting here, engine running, in the middle of the night. I tried the door handle. Locked. That is when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were handprints on the inside of the windshield. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, overlapping, pressed against the glass from the inside like someone had been desperately trying to get out. Or like many someones had been trapped inside, all reaching forward, all trying to escape. I stepped back from the car, my heart hammering. This was wrong. This was deeply, horrifyingly wrong. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but I had no signal. I never had signal out here in this dead zone between Tucson and nowhere. The smart thing would have been to get in my car and drive to where I could get reception. But something kept me there, staring at that idling Buick with its interior full of desperate handprints. I walked around to the back of the car, shining my light through the rear window. The back seat was empty too, but on the floor, partially hidden under the front passenger seat, I could see something dark and wet. It looked like oil at first, but as I adjusted my angle, I realized it was thicker, more viscous, and it was red. My hands were shaking so badly now that my flashlight beam kept jumping around. I backed away from the Buick, never taking my eyes off it, certain that at any second someone was going to sit up in that driver's seat and stare back at me. But nothing moved. The car just sat there, engine purring, exhaust rising into the night. I was halfway back to my Honda when I heard the sound. It came from inside the mall. A loud bang, like a door slamming shut, then another, then the sound of breaking glass. I spun around, pointing my flashlight at the dark mall entrances. All the doors were closed, all the windows intact, but I had definitely heard something. The sounds were coming from deep inside the building, echoing out through the empty corridors. Another crash, closer this time. It sounded like it was coming from the Macy's entrance, right behind me. I ran. I do not care how cowardly that sounds. I ran back to my Honda, jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As soon as the engine caught, I threw it in reverse and started backing away from the Buick. That is when the sedan's headlights came on, both of them, full bright, pointing right at me, blinding me. I slammed on my brakes, throwing my arm up to shield my eyes from the glare. Through the spots dancing in my vision, I could see the Buick was still empty. Still no one in the driver's seat, but the lights were on now, and as I watched, frozen in terror, the car began to roll forward. Slowly, deliberately, coming straight toward me. I jammed my car into drive and hit the gas, my tires squealing on the cold pavement. I did not look back. I just drove toward the parking lot exit as fast as I could, my heart slamming against my ribs. But when I reached the exit, my headlights revealed something impossible. There were cars blocking the way. 4 or 5 of them, parked nose to tail across the only exit, completely blocking my escape. And they had not been there when I arrived. I had driven right past this spot an hour ago. It had been empty. Now it was barricaded. I spun the wheel and headed for the other exit on the far side of the lot. My headlights swept across the empty spaces as I raced across the pavement. Behind me, in my rearview mirror, I could see the Buick, its headlights following. Not fast, just steady, relentless. The second exit was blocked too. More cars, arranged in a perfect barrier. Old sedans and trucks. All dark, all empty, all parked to prevent anyone from leaving. Panic was setting in now. Pure, animal panic. I was trapped in this parking lot with that pursuing Buick and whatever was inside the mall making those crashing sounds. I drove in a wide circle, desperately looking for any way out, but the lot was surrounded by a concrete barrier on 3 sides and the building on the 4th. The only option was to go through the barriers. I aimed my Honda at the smallest gap between 2 of the blocking cars at the main exit and gunned the engine. My little Civic hit the rear bumper of an old pickup truck at about 30 miles per hour. The impact threw me forward against my seatbelt, and my airbag exploded in my face. For a few seconds, I could not see anything, could not breathe, could not think. My ears were ringing, my chest hurt. The smell of powder from the airbag filled the car. I shoved the deflating bag aside and looked up. I had not made it through. My car was wedged between the 2 vehicles, steam hissing from my broken radiator. The engine was still running but making a horrible grinding sound. And in my rearview mirror, the Buick was still coming, slowly rolling across the empty lot toward me, its headlights getting closer. I unbuckled my seatbelt and tried my door. Jammed. I tried the passenger door. Also jammed. The impact had bent the frame. I was trapped inside my own car, and that thing was coming for me. I climbed into the back seat and kicked at the rear passenger door with everything I had. Once, twice. On the third kick, it flew open and I tumbled out onto the cold pavement. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not toward the blocked exits, but toward the one place I thought I might be safe. The mall itself. I sprinted across the parking lot to the nearest entrance, the old Sears door on the east side. I grabbed the handle, certain it would be locked, certain I would be trapped outside with that approaching Buick. But the door swung open easily, and I threw myself inside. The interior of the mall was pitch black. My flashlight was still in my wrecked car. I stood in the darkness, gasping for breath, listening to my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could see the Buick pulling up to where I had been standing just seconds before. The headlights illuminated the entrance, casting my shadow long and distorted down the dark corridor ahead of me. Then the headlights turned off. The engine died, and I was left in complete darkness. I felt my way along the wall, moving deeper into the mall. My eyes slowly adjusted, and I could make out the vague shapes of shuttered storefronts, hanging signs, dead plants in huge concrete planters. The place smelled like dust and mildew and something else, something organic and wrong. That is when I heard the footsteps, not from outside, from deeper in the mall. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. And they were coming toward me. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself invisible in the darkness. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They had a strange quality, like they were not quite synced up. Like there were multiple people walking, but not quite in step with each other. A sound escaped from my throat, something between a whimper and a gasp. The footsteps stopped, everything went silent. Then I heard breathing, not my own. This was all around me, coming from every direction. Multiple people breathing in the darkness, surrounding me in that dead mall. And then the voices started, whispers at first, too quiet to make out words. But they grew louder, more insistent. They were not speaking English. They were not speaking any language I recognized. The sounds were wrong, inhuman, like vocal cords trying to form words they were never designed to make. I ran blindly through the darkness, bouncing off walls, tripping over trash, my hands outstretched in front of me. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more urgent. I could hear those footsteps behind me now, no longer slow but running, chasing me through the labyrinth of abandoned stores and empty corridors. I burst through a door and found myself in a stairwell. Emergency exit. Without thinking, I started climbing, taking the stairs 3 at a time. I climbed past the second floor, the third floor, all the way to the roof access at the top. The door was chained shut, but the chain was old and rusty. I threw my shoulder against it once, twice, and on the third impact the chain snapped and the door flew open. Cold November air hit me as I stumbled onto the roof. The sky was clear, full of stars, and for just a moment I thought I was safe. I could see the whole parking lot from up here. I could see my wrecked Honda wedged between those blocking cars. I could see the Buick sitting alone near the entrance I had run through. And I could see dozens of other cars now, filling the parking lot. All of them dark, all of them empty, all of them with engines running. The roof access door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and saw them emerging from the stairwell. Figures, human-shaped but wrong in ways my brain could not process. They moved in that same unsynchronized way, like puppets controlled by someone still learning how bodies work. There were 7 of them, then 10, then 20, all coming toward me across the roof. I backed up to the edge, my heels hanging over the 3-story drop. The figures stopped about 20 feet away, forming a semicircle around me. In the starlight, I could see their faces now, or what should have been faces. Instead, there were just smooth expanses of skin, featureless except for mouths that hung open in silent screams. The one in the center reached out a hand toward me. On its palm was a set of car keys. My car keys, the ones I had left in my ignition. Then they all reached out, and every single one of them was holding keys. Hundreds of keys, glinting in the starlight. Keys to all those cars down in the parking lot. Keys to vehicles that brought people here. People who never left. I understood then. This mall was not abandoned. It was feeding. And every night, it needed someone new to stay. Someone to join the others. Someone whose car would sit in that lot, engine running, waiting for the next victim to investigate. I looked down at the parking lot below. At all those idling cars. At the exhaust rising into the night air like souls trying to escape. Then I looked back at the faceless figures surrounding me. And I made my choice. I jumped. I woke up in my Honda. The sun was rising. My car was parked in my usual spot near the east entrance. The parking lot was completely empty. No other cars, no barriers, just me and 300 vacant spaces in the morning light turning everything gold and normal and safe. I checked my phone. 6 a.m. My shift was over. I drove home. I showered. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, some kind of exhaustion-induced hallucination. I almost succeeded, but that night, when I went back to work, there was a new car in the lot. A silver Toyota Camry, parked at the far edge near the dead trees. Engine running, nobody inside, and on the seat, clearly visible through the window, was my flashlight. The one I had left in my car the night before. The one that should have been destroyed when I crashed. I quit that night. I did not even go into the lot. I just turned around and drove away. But here's the thing that terrifies me most. Last week, I was driving through Phoenix, running errands, living my life. I pulled into a shopping center parking lot in the middle of the afternoon. Busy place, lots of people. Completely normal. And there, in the far corner of the lot, I saw a familiar dark blue Buick. Engine running, nobody inside. I left immediately. But as I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw something that made my blood freeze. The lot was empty. Every single car was leaving except that Buick. And mine, my engine died right there at the exit. Just stopped, like someone had pulled the key. It took me 20 minutes to get it started again. 20 minutes sitting alone in that lot with that distant Buick watching me. I got the engine going eventually. I drove away. But I know the truth now. It was not just that one mall. They are everywhere. These places that hunger. These parking lots that trap. And once they have your keys, once they know your car, you are never really free. Even now, as I tell you this story, I am sitting in a parking lot. I had to stop for gas. Just a quick fill up. But when I came back to my car, the engine was already running. I did not start it. And there are 3 other cars here now that were not here before. All of them idling. All of them empty. I should leave. I know I should. But every time I reach for the gear shift, my hand stops. Because I can see them now. In my mirrors, those faceless figures, standing behind every car, holding their keys, waiting. And I am starting to think that leaving might be worse than staying. Story 6. Street where nothing sleeps. Have you ever driven through your own neighborhood and suddenly realized you have no idea where you are? That happened to me last month, and what I found on Sycamore Lane has made every night since then a waking nightmare. I am a mail carrier, have been for 19 years. I know every street in my zone like the back of my hand. Every house, every dog, every pothole, which is why it made absolutely no sense when I turned onto a street I had never seen before, right in the middle of my usual route. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, the kind of gray, heavy day where the sun never really shows up and everything feels muted and wrong. I had just finished delivering to the Morrison house on Oak Street when my GPS started acting strange. The screen flickered. Then it showed a road I did not recognize. A shortcut, supposedly, down a street called Sycamore Lane. I had never heard of Sycamore Lane. Not in 19 years of driving these neighborhoods. But there it was on my screen, and I was running behind schedule, so I took the turn. The moment my mail truck rolled onto that street, something felt off. The air got thicker, heavier, like driving into invisible water. My ears popped like I had just changed altitude, even though the road was completely flat. The street itself looked normal enough at first glance. About a dozen houses on each side. Nice suburban homes, lawns, driveways, the kind of place where people raise families and have barbecues on weekends. But it was the middle of the afternoon and every single house was dark. Not just curtains closed, dark, like nobody had lived in them for years. And the streetlights were on, all of them, burning bright even though it was still daylight. They hummed with this low, electrical drone that I could feel in my chest. That sound got inside my head immediately. Uncomfortable, unsettling. I stopped the truck in the middle of the street and checked my manifest. Sure enough, I had deliveries for 3 addresses on Sycamore Lane. How had I never noticed this street before? How had I never delivered here in almost 2 decades? The houses looked abandoned, but the lawns were perfectly maintained, trimmed, edged, not a single weed or dead leaf anywhere. Like someone was taking care of them, but nobody was home. Ever. I grabbed the first package and walked up to number 42. The house was a 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. Beautiful, really, except the windows were wrong. They were too dark, too reflective. I could not see inside at all, just my own distorted reflection staring back at me. The mailbox by the door was old, rusty. When I opened it to place the package inside, I noticed something disturbing. The mail inside had not been touched in what looked like months. Letters and flyers piled up and rotting. Water damaged. Some had that fuzzy white mold growing on them, but the name on the package I was delivering was the same as the name on those rotting letters. Someone named David Chen. The package was marked priority. Sent just 3 days ago. I put the package in the mailbox and stepped back. That humming from the streetlights got louder, more insistent, and I started feeling strange. Dizzy, like I was forgetting something important but could not remember what. Why was I here again? I stood there on that porch, staring at the dark windows, trying to remember what I was doing. The harder I tried to think, the more the thoughts slipped away, like trying to hold water in your hands. Then I heard a sound from inside the house, a soft thump, like something heavy falling. I pressed my ear against the door and listened. Nothing at first. Then I heard it again. Thump, 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 rhythmic, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep inside the house. Something was in there. Something was moving. I backed away from the door and returned to my truck. My hands were shaking. The smart thing would have been to leave right then, to get out of there and never come back. But I still had 2 more deliveries on this street. And for some reason I cannot explain, I felt compelled to finish my route. Like something would happen if I did not. The second house was number 57. A ranch-style home with a garage and a rusted basketball hoop in the driveway. As I approached, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were toys in the yard. A tricycle, a sandbox, a plastic playhouse, but they were all arranged perfectly. Too perfectly, like a museum display, like nobody had actually played with them in years. The package for this address was addressed to a family named the Johnsons. I placed it in the mailbox and turned to leave. That is when I saw the curtain move in the front window. Just a tiny shift, a flutter of fabric. But I saw it. Someone was inside that house, watching me. I called out, asked if anyone was home. My voice sounded wrong in the thick air, muffled and distant, like I was shouting underwater. No response, just that endless humming from the streetlights overhead. The darkness behind that window seemed to pulse, to breathe, and I could swear I saw the outline of a face, pale, expressionless, pressed against the glass. I ran back to my truck. My heart was hammering. Every instinct screamed at me to drive away. But when I looked at my GPS, it showed no other route out. Just Sycamore Lane stretching forward. The way I came in had somehow disappeared from the map. I drove slowly down the street toward the last delivery address. The streetlights followed me. Their humming grew louder with each one I passed, and I started noticing more disturbing details. Every mailbox had mail inside. Rotting, untouched, but fresh packages too. Priority deliveries from the last few days. Someone was sending things to these abandoned houses. Someone was expecting people to live here. The shadows between the houses were too dark, too deep. They did not match the angle of the weak afternoon light. And in those shadows, I started seeing movement. Quick darting shapes that vanished when I looked directly at them. The third house was at the very end of the street. Number 73. It looked different from the others. Older, the paint was peeling, the roof sagged, the yard was still perfectly maintained, but the house itself seemed to be rotting from the inside out. The package for this address was heavy. When I picked it up, something inside shifted and made a wet, sliding sound. The label was smeared and hard to read, but I could make out the name. My name, my full name, and my home address. My blood turned to ice. I was holding a package addressed to myself, sent to this house that should not exist, on a street I had never seen before today. I dropped the package. It hit the sidewalk with a sickening thud and split open. What spilled out made me stagger backward in horror. Photographs, dozens of them, all of me, taken over what must have been weeks or months. Me leaving my house in the morning. Me delivering mail. Me sleeping in my bed. The most recent one showed me standing exactly where I was now, holding that package, taken from somewhere behind me. I spun around. Nobody there. Just empty street and those humming streetlights and the gathering darkness that was coming faster than it should. That is when I noticed something that shattered my understanding of reality. The houses on this street. They were exact copies of houses on my normal route. Number 42 looked exactly like the Morrison house I had just left. Number 57 was identical to the Patterson house on Maple Drive. Number 73 was a mirror of my own home. This entire street was a recreation. A copy, but a wrong copy. A haunted copy where something terrible had replaced the people who should live there. The humming reached a fever pitch. The streetlights burned brighter, even though full darkness had fallen now. And I realized I could not remember how long I had been standing there. Minutes. Hours. The sky was black. My truck was gone. The street stretched endlessly in both directions. I started running, picked a direction and ran as hard as I could. But every house I passed was the same dozen houses repeating over and over. An infinite loop of suburban nightmare. And behind every dark window, I could see those pale faces. Dozens of them, hundreds, all watching me run. The streetlights never turned off. They burned and hummed and burned. And the more I ran, the more I forgot. Forgot why I was running. Forgot where I came from. My memories started dissolving like sugar in water. I finally collapsed in the middle of the street, exhausted, defeated. And as I lay there on the cold asphalt, I remembered something horrifying. This was not the first time I had been here. I had been on this street before, many times before. I just forgot every time I left. How many times had I delivered to Sycamore Lane? How many times had I run and forgotten and come back? The faces appeared in the windows above me, closer now, clear enough to see details. And I recognized them. They were mail carriers, all of them, wearing the same uniform I wore, trapped behind those dark windows, watching the newest arrival with dead, knowing eyes. I understood then. This street collected people, delivery drivers, service workers, anyone who came here to drop something off. It pulled them in and never let them go, made them forget until they could not find their way out anymore. Until they became part of the houses, part of the street itself. A door opened somewhere behind me. I heard footsteps, slow, heavy. Something was coming to collect me, to add me to the growing number of faces in those windows. I do not know how I got out. My next clear memory is sitting in my truck on Oak Street, the Morrison house in front of me, my hand holding a package I had already delivered. My GPS showed my normal route. No Sycamore Lane anywhere on the map, but I lost 3 hours. 3 hours I cannot account for, and my uniform had dirt on the knees like I had been kneeling on the ground. There were grass stains that had not been there before. That was 4 weeks ago. I have looked for Sycamore Lane every day since then, driven through every neighborhood in my zone, searched maps and county records. Nothing. The street does not exist, except in my memories and in the creeping fear that fills me every time I make a delivery. Because I am starting to forget again. Little things at first. Street names, house numbers. Yesterday I delivered to the same address 3 times without realizing it. This morning I could not remember my own road, the one I have driven for 19 years. And last night, I woke up to find myself standing in my driveway in my uniform. I do not remember getting dressed. Do not remember leaving my bed. But my mail truck was running. The GPS was on. And it was showing a route, a shortcut, down a street called Sycamore Lane. The streetlights are calling me back. I can hear them humming even now. Even here, that low electrical drone that gets inside your skull and pulls at your memories. Makes you forget who you are. Makes you forget why you should stay away. I have tried to quit my job. Tried to stop delivering mail. But every morning I wake up in my truck. Every day I end up back on my route, getting closer and closer to that turn, that shortcut I should never take again. The scary thing is not that the street exists. The horrifying truth is that it is everywhere. Every neighborhood has one. A street where the lights never turn off. Where houses sit empty but maintained. Where something waits behind dark windows for people like me, people who are just trying to do their jobs. If you drive for a living, pay attention. If your GPS shows you a shortcut you have never seen before, ignore it. If you find yourself on a street where all the houses are dark but the streetlights burn endlessly, do not stop. Do not get out of your vehicle. Do not try to deliver anything. Because once you step onto that street, it marks you, claims you, and no matter how far you run, no matter how hard you try to forget, you will always find your way back. The humming never stops. The lights never turn off. And the houses never run out of windows for new faces to watch from. I can feel it pulling at me now. Stronger every day. I know I will go back. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. But soon. Very soon. And when I do, I will forget to leave. I will become another face in another window. Another mail carrier who took a wrong turn and never found the right road home. If you are listening to this, remember my story. Remember Sycamore Lane. Because the next time you take a shortcut, the next time you turn down a street you do not recognize, it might be waiting for you too. And once those streetlights get inside your head, once that humming starts, you will forget everything that matters. Everything except the need to stay. To watch. To wait for the next delivery. The lights are always on. The street is always there. And it is always hungry. Story 7. All-night diner without sound. I should have kept driving that night. I should have trusted the crawling sensation on the back of my neck that told me something was terribly wrong with that place. But I was exhausted, hungry, and desperate for anything familiar after 12 hours on the highway cutting through the Nevada desert. That diner appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not spoken aloud. Instead, it became the most horrifying experience of my life. And I am still not certain I fully escaped it. The exit sign read Ashwood Junction, though I have searched every map since and found no town by that name. My headlights swept across cracked asphalt as I pulled off Interstate 15, following a weathered arrow pointing toward food and gas. The road narrowed immediately, swallowed by darkness so complete it felt solid, pressing against my windows. My phone showed no signal, which was not unusual out here in the empty stretches where civilization forgot to follow. The clock on my dashboard blinked 2:47 a.m. in harsh green numbers that burned my tired eyes. Then I saw it. The diner materialized from the blackness like something pulled from an old photograph, all chrome and neon spelling out Rosie in flickering pink letters. Every window glowed with warm yellow light, the kind that promises safety and normalcy. A dozen cars sat in the parking lot, their metal bodies catching the neon glow. American makes mostly Fords and Chevys from various decades, some looking showroom new, others showing rust and age. The lot was nearly full, which seemed strange for this hour in the middle of nowhere, but I felt relief flood through me. People meant safety. People meant I was not alone in this vast, empty darkness. I parked near the entrance and killed my engine. The silence that followed felt wrong somehow, too thick and heavy, but I blamed my exhausted mind playing tricks. I grabbed my wallet and stepped out into air so still it seemed to hold its breath. No wind moved across the desert. No insects chirped their night songs. The temperature felt neither hot nor cold, just neutral, like stepping into nothing at all. The diner looked perfect, almost too perfect, like a movie set designed to represent the ideal American roadside restaurant. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, chrome-trimmed tables gleamed under fluorescent lights, and a long counter stretched toward the back with red leather stools bolted to the floor. The black and white checkered floor shone as if freshly waxed. Everything screamed normal, familiar, safe. Everything except one detail that my brain struggled to process even as I stood staring through the window. People sat in nearly every booth and at most of the counter stools. I could see them clearly through the spotless glass. A trucker in a plaid shirt hunched over a plate of eggs and bacon in the nearest booth. A family of 4 occupied a table near the back, the parents facing each other while 2 children sat between them. A woman in a blue waitress uniform stood behind the counter, her hand wrapped around a coffee pot, frozen mid-pour into a white ceramic mug. An older man in a tan jacket sat alone at the counter, his fork lifted halfway to his mouth. But no one moved. Not a single person shifted position, raised their food, turned their head, or acknowledged my presence outside. They simply sat there, perfectly still, like mannequins arranged in an elaborate display. Yet they were not mannequins. I could see the texture of their clothing, the natural way their bodies settled into seats, the casual positioning of their hands and arms. They looked absolutely real and absolutely frozen. My hand reached for the door handle before my rational mind could stop it. I needed to understand what I was seeing. I needed to know if this was real or if exhaustion had finally pushed me into hallucination. The metal felt solid and cold under my palm as I pulled the door open and stepped inside. The first thing that struck me was the warmth. Pleasant heat wrapped around me like a blanket, carrying the mouth-watering aroma of coffee, bacon, pancakes, and maple syrup. The smells were so vivid and powerful that my stomach clenched with hunger despite the creeping dread spreading through my chest. Steam rose from plates of food scattered across tables and counter spaces. Coffee sat in mugs, black liquid still rippling slightly as if just poured. A piece of toast rested half-eaten on a plate near the door, butter melting into its golden surface. Fresh food, hot food, recently prepared and abandoned. But the people had not moved. Now that I stood inside with them, the wrongness became overwhelming and undeniable. The trucker in the nearest booth still hunched over his breakfast, his eyes open and staring at his plate, his chest completely motionless. No breathing, no blinking, nothing. The family remained locked in their positions. The children, his faces turned toward their parents with expressions that might have been mid-conversation. The waitress behind the counter held that coffee pot at the exact angle it had been when I first saw her, her face pleasant and blank. I approached the trucker slowly, my footsteps echoing in the disturbing silence. No background music played. No hum of refrigerators or air conditioning systems filled the space. The diner existed in a bubble of absolute quiet that pressed against my eardrums until they ached. I reached out and touched the man, his shoulder, half expecting him to turn and laugh, to tell me this was some elaborate prank or performance art piece. His body felt solid but wrong, like touching something that existed between states. Not quite flesh, but not quite anything else. He remained frozen. His eyes did not shift toward me. His chest did not rise with breath. Yet something about him screamed alive in ways I could not articulate or understand. This was not a corpse or a statue. This was something else entirely, something horrible that my mind refused to categorize. I pulled my hand back and stumbled toward the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. The waitress stood so close I could see the name tag pinned to her uniform reading Martha in faded letters. Her lipstick was a cheerful red, her hair pulled back in a neat bun showing gray roots. She looked like someone's grandmother, kind and tired and real. Except she was not real, not anymore, not in any way that made sense. The coffee pot in her hand still emanated heat. I could feel warmth radiating from the liquid inside. On the counter before her sat the white mug, filled perhaps 3/4 full with black coffee, and beside it rested a small pitcher of cream and a sugar dispenser. Everything arranged as if someone was about to enjoy a late-night drink. I reached out and touched the mug. Hot ceramic burned my fingertips. The coffee was fresh, impossibly fresh, as if Martha had poured it seconds before I entered. But Martha had not moved, could not move, would not move, perhaps forever. My gaze swept across the diner again, cataloging each frozen figure with growing horror. Everyone held food or utensils. Everyone looked caught in the middle of eating or drinking or serving. The scene suggested normalcy interrupted. Life paused mid-moment. But for how long? Hours? Days? Years? The family in the back booth drew my attention. The father, his hand rested on a salt shaker, fingers wrapped loosely around the glass cylinder. The mother had both hands on the table, palms down, wedding ring glinting under the fluorescent lights. Between them, the children sat perfectly still, a boy who looked maybe 8 years old and a girl perhaps 6. Their eyes were open, staring at their parents with expressions that twisted something painful in my chest. I moved closer, unable to stop myself despite every screaming instinct telling me to run. The boy wore a red t-shirt with a cartoon character I did not recognize. The girl had pigtails tied with yellow ribbons that matched her dress. Normal kids, American kids who should have been home in bed, not frozen in this nightmare diner in the middle of nowhere. That was when I noticed the dates. On the table beside the father, his hand sat a folded newspaper. I could read the masthead from where I stood. Las Vegas, Sunday, November 17th, 1987. Nearly 40 years ago, my blood turned to ice water in my veins. I spun toward the trucker, searching his booth for any identifying markers, and spotted a wallet lying open beside his plate. Through the plastic window of the wallet, I could see a driver, his license. The expiration date read 1992. I rushed to other tables, other booths, finding more evidence scattered like breadcrumbs through a forest of the damned. A watch on the older man, its wrist stopped at 3:15, its date window showing March 8, 1979. A receipt near the waitress, its hand dated June 2, 2001. A book lay face down on one booth, its table, a bookmark protruding from pages. The bookmark advertised a radio station that had gone off the air in 1995. These people came from different times, different years, different decades, all trapped here in this horrifying space that existed outside normal reality. And the food before them remained hot and fresh, as if time held no meaning within these walls, as if the diner existed in some permanent present moment that captured and held whatever entered it. I backed toward the door, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps that echoed obscenely in the silence. This place was not real, could not be real, yet it existed around me with undeniable physical presence. My mind raced through possibilities. Supernatural trap, alien abduction site, government experiment. None of the explanations felt adequate for the pure wrongness saturating every molecule of air I breathed. That was when I felt it, the sensation of being watched, heavy and focused, like invisible eyes boring into my back. I spun around, searching the diner for any sign of movement, any indication of who or what observed me. The frozen people remained motionless. Nothing had changed in their positions. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that something watched me, studied me, perhaps decided what to do with me. The feeling came from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls themselves, from the spaces between the frozen people, from the very air that smelled so deliciously of coffee and breakfast food. The diner itself was aware. The diner was alive in some incomprehensible way, and it had noticed my presence. I ran for the door, my shoes squeaking on the checkered floor, my shoulders slamming into the metal frame as I shoved through into the parking lot. The night air hit me like a physical blow, still perfectly calm and temperature neutral, still carrying that same suffocating silence. I sprinted toward my car, fumbling my keys from my pocket, fingers shaking so badly I could barely grip them. Behind me, the diner glowed with cheerful light. Through the windows, I could see the frozen people exactly as I had left them, unchanged and unchanging. Nothing pursued me. Nothing moved. Yet that feeling of being watched intensified until my skin crawled with the sensation of invisible fingers trailing across my flesh. I threw myself into my car and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the dead silence. I threw the car into reverse, my tires squealing as I backed away from that horrible place. My headlights swept across the parking lot, illuminating the other vehicles sitting silent and abandoned, and I realized with a fresh wave of terror that these were probably the cars of the frozen people inside. Vehicles from different eras, trapped here just like their owners, permanent fixtures in this nightmare space. I found the access road and floored the accelerator, not caring about speed limits or caution, caring only about putting distance between myself and Rosie, his diner. The road stretched ahead in my headlights, narrow and dark, and I followed it with desperate focus, watching for the interstate signs that would mean safety and escape. But the road went on too long, much too long. I had driven maybe half a mile to reach the diner from the highway. Yet I covered 3 miles, 5 miles, 7 miles without seeing the interstate. The road simply continued through absolute darkness, unchanging and endless. My gas gauge began to drop, the needle moving faster than it should, and panic clawed at my throat with razored fingers. Then, ahead in my headlights, I saw the neon, pink letters spelling Rosie. It was impossibly familiar, impossibly there. I was back at the diner, though I had driven only forward, never turning, never changing course. The parking lot spread before me, the same cars in the same positions, the same warm yellow light pouring from the windows. I spun the wheel hard, turning around in the middle of the road, and drove the opposite direction. Surely I had become confused, disoriented in the darkness. Surely the interstate lay this way. But 8 miles later, the pink neon appeared again ahead of me, the diner materializing from the blackness like a terrible beacon calling me home. 3 more times I tried different approaches, different speeds, even closing my eyes and driving blind for stretches while counting seconds. Every attempt ended the same way. The diner waited for me, patient and implacable, its warm lights promising shelter and rest and the same frozen fate as the people inside. Finally, I stopped the car in the middle of the road and killed the engine. My hands shook on the steering wheel. My heart felt like it might explode from the fear and confusion and desperate need to understand. How did I escape? How did anyone escape? Or did they? Were all those frozen people once like me, travelers who stumbled onto this place and could not find their way out? I sat there in the darkness for what felt like hours but might have been minutes. Time moved strangely here, thick and resistant like trying to walk through water. Eventually, I turned the key again and drove back to the diner's parking lot. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to think, to plan, to understand the rules of this trap before it closed completely. I parked in the same spot as before but did not get out. Instead, I studied the diner through my windshield, searching for details I had missed. The neon sign flickered occasionally, pink light stuttering before stabilizing. The windows showed the same frozen tableau, unchanged despite the time that had passed. But now I noticed something new. One of the booths sat empty. A single booth near the back, different from the others. No plates, no drinks, no frozen person trapped mid-meal. Just empty red vinyl and a clean table surface. An invitation, a space waiting to be filled. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The diner collected people. It trapped them in stasis, preserving them forever in one eternal moment of ordinary life. And it left open spaces for new additions to its horrifying collection. That empty booth called to me, and some terrible part of my mind understood that if I returned inside, if I sat down at that table, if I stayed just a moment too long, I would become part of the display. Another frozen figure for future travelers to discover and flee from. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me so badly I yelped. I pulled it out with shaking hands and stared at the screen. Full signal, 5 bars, showing 5:32 a.m. Over 2 hours had passed, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. A text message from my sister waited, sent 8 minutes ago, asking if I was okay and why I had not checked in at my scheduled stops. The ordinary normalcy of that message, the connection to the real world beyond this pocket of nightmare, broke something loose in my chest. I was not completely trapped. Not yet. Some link remained to the world outside, to normal reality where time moved forward and people stayed alive and diners were just diners. I typed a response with fumbling fingers, telling her I was fine, just running late, would call soon. I hit send and watched the message go through, the little indicator showing it had been delivered. Then I started my car again, pulled onto the access road, and drove toward the interstate with grim determination. This time, I did not watch the road ahead. Instead, I kept my eyes locked on my phone, GPS, watching the blue dot that represented my position. The GPS showed the interstate 2 miles ahead, and I trusted that electronic certainty over my own eyes and the lies this place tried to feed me. I drove slowly, carefully, following the GPS coordinates even as the road seemed to stretch and twist around me. After what felt like an eternity, the GPS announced I had reached the interstate. But ahead of me stretched only darkness and more access road. I kept driving anyway, trusting the technology, believing in the world beyond this trap. And then, like breaking through the surface of deep water into air, everything changed. Headlights blazed past me on a highway. An 18-wheeler roared by, its running lights creating rivers of color in the darkness. The interstate existed around me, solid and real and blessedly ordinary. I merged into traffic, my hands still shaking, my heart still racing, and drove north without looking back. I did not stop for gas or food or rest until I reached Las Vegas 3 hours later, pulling into the most crowded, brightest, loudest casino parking lot I could find. Only surrounded by hundreds of people and bathed in artificial light did I finally feel safe enough to breathe. Now, 2 years later, I have never driven Interstate 15 through that stretch of Nevada again. I take different routes, longer paths that add hours to my trips. But sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I search online for mentions of Rosie's Diner or Ashwood Junction. I find nothing, no records, no reviews, no references of any kind. But I do find missing persons reports, dozens of them, spread across decades, all with one thing in common. People who disappeared while driving through Nevada, last seen at rest stops or pulling off at unmapped exits, never heard from again. When I look at their photographs, I sometimes recognize their faces. The trucker in the plaid shirt, the family of 4, the older man who sat alone at the counter, all missing, all vanished, all frozen forever in Rosie's Diner. And I know the diner is still out there, waiting in the darkness, its pink neon flickering, its warm lights glowing, its empty booth ready for the next traveler who makes the terrible mistake of stopping for a meal they will never finish. I escaped, but I carry the knowledge that some nightmares are real, some traps are inescapable, and some places exist outside the normal rules of our reality. The most terrifying part? I still feel watched sometimes, even here in the safety of my home, even surrounded by the familiar and the ordinary. And I wonder if the diner let me go, or if I am still there somehow, frozen like all the others, and this life I think I am living is just the dream of a man who sat down in an empty booth and never got back up. Story 8. Driving past the same place twice. I've been driving the same stretch of highway for 3 hours, and I still haven't left it. That is the horrifying part. That is what keeps me awake now, long after that terrifying night ended. I am not crazy. I work in accounting. I have a mortgage. I drink my coffee black at 6 in the morning and watch football on Sunday afternoons. I'm the kind of person who doesn't believe in ghost stories or urban legends or any of that nonsense. But I'm telling you this because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what happens when the world stops working the way it is supposed to. My name is Derek, and I was driving from Denver to Minneapolis for a work conference. I made that trip 100 times before. I know that highway better than I know some of my friends. Highway 76 straight through Nebraska and Iowa, boring and flat and predictable. Exactly the kind of drive I wanted after a stressful week at the office. I left at 4 in the afternoon on a Friday. The weather was clear. The sun was bright. I had my music and my coffee and all the confidence of a man who had done this exact drive so many times he could probably do it in his sleep. At mile marker 87, there's a rest stop. Nothing special about it. A small brown building with bathrooms, a vending machine that never works, and a parking lot with maybe 6 spaces. I stopped there to stretch my legs and refill my coffee from a thermos I brought. The building looked exactly like it always did. Weathered, tired, the kind of place that serves its purpose but attracts no attention. I was in and out in 5 minutes, back on the road, back to the familiar rhythm of the highway. I continued driving. The landscape unfolded exactly as it always did, flat fields stretching to the horizon, a few scattered farmhouses in the distance, power lines cutting straight lines across the sky. Normal, boring, safe. I was listening to a podcast about a serial killer case from the 80s, the kind of dark true crime story that makes the boring drive go faster. The sun was getting lower on the horizon, painting everything in that golden late afternoon light that made Nebraska almost beautiful. At mile marker 92, I saw something that made me turn down the podcast. A billboard. Not unusual in itself. Billboards are everywhere on highways, but this one was different. It was old, faded. The paint was peeling in places, and the message was strange. It said, "Find what you running from." That was it. No company name. No website. Just that eerie, chilling message in white letters on a dark background. I remember thinking it was probably some art project or a message from a church. Something meant to be profound. But something about it bothered me. The message felt too specific, too personal, like it was talking directly to me. I kept driving. The sun continued its descent. The fields continued their endless march past my window. I was making good time. I'd be in Minneapolis by midnight. Easy. I felt the kind of contentment that comes from a successful day of travel. When you got the radio right and the road is smooth and you're in that zone where your body drives and your mind drifts. That's when I saw the rest stop again. I blinked. I turned down the podcast and stared at it. The same small brown building with the same weathered look. The same parking lot with the same 6 spaces. My mind did a quick calculation. I'd been driving for just under an hour since I left that rest stop. I'd been maintaining a steady 65 miles per hour. That meant I should be at least 65 miles past that building. It was impossible for me to be seeing it again. Impossible. I pulled into the parking lot anyway. I needed to understand what I was looking at. I parked in the same spot I had parked before, or at least it looked like the same spot. I got out of my truck and looked around carefully. The building was exactly as I remembered it. The same crack in the concrete by the door. The same broken slat in the wooden bench outside. The same sense of tired abandonment that hung over the place like a stale smell. I checked my odometer. I'd driven 87 miles since I started. That meant I should have been at mile marker 174. But when I looked at the mile marker sign in the parking lot, it read 87. The same number, the exact same marker. A creeping, terrifying feeling started to work its way through my stomach. Not fear exactly, but the beginning of something worse. Doubt. I was doubting what I knew to be true. I was doubting my ability to understand where I was in the world. I went inside the rest stop bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I told myself I miscalculated. I misread the odometer. I'd gotten confused about which rest stop I'd been at. These things happen. People made mistakes. But I knew I wasn't confused. I knew I'd read everything correctly. I knew that something was wrong. I got back in my truck and continued driving. This time, I was paying close attention. I watched the mile markers. 88, 89, 90, 91. I saw the same billboard. Find what you running from. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was something else written below the main message. The letters were smaller and more weathered, and I had to focus to read them. It said, "They were still behind you." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I pressed the accelerator. The truck surged forward. 80 miles per hour. 90, 95. The landscape blurred past. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. I was trying not to think about what the billboard had said. Trying not to think about what might be behind me. But I couldn't. Did you help it? I kept checking my mirrors. There was nothing behind me. The road was empty. No cars, no other headlights, just empty highway stretching back toward the horizon. But I felt watched. I felt pursued. There was a presence behind me. I was certain of it. Even though I couldn't see it. I drove for what I thought was another 20 minutes. The sun was almost gone now, replaced by that eerie twilight time when day hasn't to quite become night, but the world has already started to get scary. I watched the mile markers. 100, 105, 110. I was making progress. I was leaving that rest stop behind. I was going to be fine. Then I saw it. The rest stop appeared around a curve in the road, exactly where it couldn't to possibly be. I slammed on the brakes hard enough to feel my body press against the seatbelt. I sat there in my truck with the engine idling, staring at the small brown building that should have been miles behind me. My hands were shaking. My mouth had gone dry. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I thought I might be having a heart attack. The mile marker sign read 87. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, maybe an hour. Time had become unreliable. I was trying to process what was happening. There were a few possibilities. I was having a psychotic break. I had somehow gotten turned around and was driving in circles, which was impossible given how straight the highway was and how much attention I'd been paying. I was dreaming, and I'd wake up in my truck at a real rest stop somewhere normal. Or something was fundamentally wrong with reality itself. Something was broken in the world, and I was caught in the middle of it. I put the truck in drive and turned around. I drove back the way I'd come, slowly this time, watching everything. The fields looked different now, though I couldn't explain why. The light was fading. The darkness was coming. I drove for what felt like a long time, and I didn't see anything. No highway, no signs, just endless empty road and the growing sense that I was moving in a direction that didn't lead anywhere. Then the landscape changed suddenly. I passed the billboard again. This time I could read the smaller text clearly. It didn't say, "They were still behind you." It said, "They were still inside with you." I jammed on the brakes so hard my truck skidded sideways across the highway. I sat there with my heart hammering in my chest, and I realized something with absolute, terrifying certainty. I looked at the back seat of my truck. It was empty. I looked at the passenger seat. Nothing, but I felt the presence. I felt something in the cab with me. Something in the darkness that was growing thicker now, filling up the spaces between things. I started driving again. I didn't know what else to do. I drove faster now, pushing 80, 90, 100 miles per hour. The darkness was complete now. My headlights were cutting through the black like pale swords, but they weren't reaching far enough. The darkness pressed down on the truck from all sides. I could feel it. I could feel the weight of it, the hunger of it. The rest stop appeared again, and again, and again. I lost count of how many times I passed it. 10 times, 50 times, 100. Each time, I told myself that if I just drove far enough, if I just maintained speed and focus, I'd finally break through to the other side. But there was no other side. There was only the rest stop and the billboard and the mile marker 87 and the growing certainty that I had entered something that wasn't to place anymore. It was a trap. Somewhere around midnight, I stopped trying to escape. I pulled into the rest stop parking lot for the last time and turned off the engine. The silence was absolute. No wind, no distant traffic, no sound of civilization anywhere. Just me and the darkness and whatever was sitting in the back seat of my truck. I got out of my cab and walked to the small brown building. The door was unlocked. Inside, the bathroom was clean, too clean, like no one had ever actually used it. There was a sink and a toilet and a mirror. I looked at my reflection in that mirror, and I barely recognized the man staring back. He was gaunt. His eyes were hollowed out. He looked like someone who had been driving for days without sleep, even though it had only been a few hours. But there was something else in that mirror. Behind me, in the darkness of the bathroom behind me, a shape, a figure. It was tall and thin and completely dark, like it was made of the absence of light. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching me watch it in the mirror. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I was past that by then. I understood what was happening. I understood that I'd made a wrong turn somewhere, taken a road that led somewhere else, somewhere that operated by different rules. I understood that there was no escape because escape implied movement toward something. And there was nothing beyond this place. This place was everything now. I left the bathroom and sat down on the bench outside the rest stop building. The night was so dark I could barely see my own hands in front of my face. But I could feel that thing. It came out of the building and stood in front of me. I still couldn't see it clearly. It was like looking at television static shaped like a person. But I could sense its attention on me. Its interest. That's when I understood the billboard message. Find what you running from. Because I had been running from something. For years, I'd been running from the choices I'd made, running from the person I'd hurt, running from the things I'd done and the person I'd become because of those things. I'd been running so fast and so far that I'd somehow run right off the edge of the normal world and into this place. This rest stop, this trap made just for me. The figure leaned down. I still couldn't see its face, if it had a face. But I felt its breath. and it smelled like despair and regret and all the things I'd been running from. It whispered something to me. Not in words. It was more like a feeling poured directly into my mind. It said that I couldn't leave, that I would be here forever, repeating this drive over and over again, that every time I thought I escaped, I could find myself back at mile marker 87. That time would fold back on itself. That days would become moments, would become days again. That I would forget what I was running from, but I'd never stop running. I woke up in my truck the next morning. It was dawn. Pale light was just starting to creep across the sky. I was parked at a rest stop on Highway 76. The building was small and brown and weathered. The mile marker said 87. My odometer showed that I'd only driven 87 miles. I've been driving for 3 days now, or maybe it's been 3 years. Time doesn't work the way it used to anymore. Every time I try to pass mile marker 87, I find myself driving in circles. Every time I try to turn around and go back to Denver, I end up at the same rest stop. Every time I close my eyes to sleep, I see that dark figure leaning toward me. And here is the worst part. Here is what truly horrifies me. This stopped being the only person here. Sometimes, when I pull into the parking lot, there are other cars. And sometimes, I see other people. They look confused and desperate and haunted. They ask me if I know how to get out. They ask me if I know what is happening. But I can't answer them because I know what is really happening. I know that we're all stuck here. I know that we're all running from something. I know that we'll all never leave. Just before dawn this morning, I met a man in the rest stop bathroom. He was staring at his reflection, trying to understand how long he'd been here. I asked him his name. He thought about it for a long time before he answered. He said his name was Derek. He said he'd been driving to Minneapolis for a work conference. He said he'd been on this highway for a very long time. I didn't tell him that I was Derek. I didn't tell him that we might be the same person. I didn't tell him that I suspect we were all versions of the same lost driver, multiplying in this place, repeating our desperate attempts at escape over and over again. Some things are too terrifying to speak out loud, even when you were already living in the nightmare. I am still here at the rest stop. My truck is parked outside. My coffee thermos sits on the passenger seat, long cold. The mile marker still reads 87. And every time I close my eyes, I can feel that dark figure standing behind me, watching, waiting, knowing that I can never outrun the things I came here trying to escape. Story 9. Something followed me home. Have you ever walked into your own house and felt like a stranger was already inside? I have. And the terrifying truth is, I brought it home with me. My name is Mike, and I need to tell you what happened 3 weeks ago on Interstate 40, somewhere between Flagstaff and Albuquerque. Because whatever I picked up on that empty stretch of highway is still here. Still in my house. Still watching me from the shadows every single night. It started when my truck broke down at 2 a.m. Middle of nowhere, no cell signal, just miles of desert darkness on both sides of the road and that endless yellow line disappearing into the black. I had been driving for 14 hours straight, trying to make it home to Oklahoma City after a job in Phoenix. Stupid. I should have stopped at a motel, but I just wanted to sleep in my own bed. The engine made a horrible grinding sound and then died completely. I coasted to the shoulder and sat there in the silence, watching my headlights dim and finally go dark. The only light came from a half moon hanging low over the desert, casting everything in that sick gray color that makes the world look dead. I got out and popped the hood, knowing I would not see anything useful in the darkness. The engine was still hot, ticking as it cooled. The smell of burnt oil hung in the air. I was stranded, completely alone. And that is when I felt it for the first time, that creepy sensation of being watched. I turned around slowly, scanning the empty desert. Nothing, just scrub brush and rocks and that vast emptiness stretching away forever. But the feeling did not go away. It got stronger. My skin crawled with it. Every instinct I had was screaming that I was not alone out here. Then I saw the footprints. They were in the dust on the shoulder, illuminated by the moonlight. Bare footprints, human-sized, leading from the desert up to my truck and then circling around it. Multiple times, like someone had been walking around my vehicle while I was inside, examining it, studying it. The prints were fresh. I could see the clear outline of toes, the ball of the foot, the heel. My heart started hammering. I looked around again, more frantically this time. The highway was empty in both directions. No cars, no lights, no sign of another living soul. But someone had been here. Someone without shoes had walked right up to my truck in the middle of the desert night. I got back in my cab and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I tried my phone again. Still no signal. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, watching the mirrors, watching the darkness, waiting for something to move out there. Nothing did. Finally, I saw headlights approaching from the east. A semi-truck, moving fast. I jumped out and started waving my arms, desperate for help. The truck slowed down and pulled over about 50 feet ahead of me. Air brakes hissing, engine rumbling. The driver's door opened and a heavy-set guy in his 50s climbed down. He walked back toward me, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As he got closer, I could see his face was lined and weathered, the face of someone who had been driving these roads for decades. He looked at my truck, then at me, and something passed across his expression. Something that looked like recognition, or maybe fear. He told me he could give me a tow to the next town, about 30 miles up the road. I thanked him, relief flooding through me. We hooked up my truck, and I climbed into his cab. The interior smelled like coffee and cigarettes and diesel fuel. Normal smells, comforting smells. We drove in silence for a few miles. Then he asked me where exactly I had broken down. I told him. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He said that was a bad spot. People broke down there all the time. And people who broke down there sometimes came back different. Changed. He would not explain what he meant. Just kept driving. His eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look at me. I laughed it off. Tried to. But something about the way he said it made my stomach knot up. The fear in his voice was real. And he kept glancing in his mirrors, like he was checking to see if something was following us. We made it to a small town called Pueblo Alto just as the sun was coming up. He dropped me in a garage and refused to take any money. Just told me to get my truck fixed fast and keep driving. Do not stop. Do not look back. Get home as quick as I could. The mechanic found the problem in about an hour. Blown alternator. Simple fix. By noon, I was back on the road, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had settled into my bones. I drove straight through, stopping only for gas, pushing my truck hard to make up for lost time. I made it home that night around 8. My house is a small ranch-style place on the edge of town. Nothing special, but it had always felt safe. Comfortable. Mine. I pulled into the driveway, grabbed my bag from the truck, and walked up to my front door. That is when I noticed the smell. Faint but distinct, like desert dust and something else. Something organic and wrong. It was coming from inside my house. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything looked normal. My furniture where I left it, mail piled on the kitchen counter, the cat clock on the wall still ticking away. But the smell was stronger in here, and the temperature felt off. Too cold, like I had left the AC running. But I had not. I checked every room. Nothing out of place. Nothing missing. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. The stress of the breakdown, the weird truck driver, the lack of sleep. I was imagining things. I took a hot shower, ate some leftover pizza, and collapsed into bed. I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of footsteps in my hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps, the same rhythm as those prints in the desert. Bare feet on my hardwood floor. I lay there frozen, barely breathing, listening to those footsteps come closer. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could see the shadow under the door. Someone was standing there, standing completely still, waiting. I do not know how long I lay there staring at that shadow. Minutes, hours, time stopped meaning anything. Finally, the shadow moved away. The footsteps retreated down the hallway. I heard my back door open and close softly. I jumped out of bed and ran to the back door. It was unlocked. I always lock my doors. Always. But it was standing open about 6 inches, letting in the cold night air. I slammed it shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the deadbolt. I did not sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, holding a baseball bat, watching the hallway. Nothing happened, but I could feel it. That presence, that same feeling I had on the desert highway. Something was in my house with me. The next day I called a locksmith and had all my locks changed. I installed security cameras, front door, back door, both sides of the house. I felt safer with the cameras. Like I could finally prove to myself I was imagining things. That night I watched the camera feeds on my phone from my bedroom. Everything was quiet until around 2:30. Then the back door camera showed something that made my blood run cold. The door was opening, slowly, just a few inches, but I had locked it. I had checked it twice. I grabbed my phone and called the police while I watched the feed. The door closed again, then opened, then closed, like something was testing it, playing with it. The operator told me a unit was on the way. Stay on the line. Stay calm. The front door camera showed movement. A shadow passing across the porch. Too tall to be human. Too thin, moving in that same slow, deliberate way. The police arrived 6 minutes later. They searched my house top to bottom. Found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. They were polite about it, but I could tell they thought I was either drunk or crazy. One of them suggested I get an alarm system. The other one asked if I lived alone, if I had been under any stress lately. I told them about the breakdown, about the footprints in the desert. They exchanged a look that I did not understand. After they left, I reviewed all the camera footage. And that is when I saw it. In the timestamp right before the back door started opening, there was a glitch. A half second of static. When the image came back, there was something standing right in front of the camera. So close that all you could see was skin, pale skin covered in dust. And then the glitch cleared and it was gone. I should have left right then. Checked into a hotel, gone to stay with friends. But this was my home. I had lived here for 8 years. I was not going to let some paranoid delusion drive me out of my own house. Big mistake. That night the sound started. Scratching inside my walls. Slow dragging sounds across my ceiling. Footsteps in the attic where I do not have an attic. And breathing. I could hear breathing coming from my closet, my bathroom, from under my bed. Always just out of sight. Always when I was alone. I started sleeping with the lights on. Started drinking to knock myself out. But even drunk, I would wake up to find things moved. My keys on the kitchen table when I left them by the door. My shoes lined up differently. Pictures on the wall tilted at wrong angles. Small things, subtle things, things that made me question my own sanity. The worst part was not the sounds or the moved objects. It was the feeling, that constant sensation of being watched, of sharing my space with something that did not belong, something that had followed me home from that desert highway and decided to stay. I started researching, looking up stories about that stretch of road, and I found them. Dozens of accounts going back decades. People breaking down in that exact spot. People seeing footprints. People making it home safely only to find their homes did not feel the same anymore. Most of the posts were old, abandoned, like the people just stopped writing one day. One post from 6 years ago stood out. A woman described the same things I was experiencing. The footsteps, the moved objects, the feeling of being watched. She said it got worse over time. That whatever followed her home started showing itself. Started getting closer. Her last post was just 3 words. It is inside. She never posted again. I am writing this now because it has been 3 weeks and things are escalating. Last night I woke up to find my bedroom door open. I always close it, always, and there were wet footprints leading from the hallway to my bed. Desert dust mixed with something dark. They stopped right next to where I was sleeping. I got up to follow them and they led to my bathroom. The mirror was fogged up like someone had just taken a hot shower. But the water had not been running. And written in the condensation, in shaky letters, were 2 words. Welcome home. I ran. Finally did what I should have done weeks ago. I am in a motel now, 2 towns over. But I can still feel it. That presence. It is not tied to my house anymore. It is tied to me. And I know with horrible certainty that it does not matter where I go. Hotel rooms, friends' houses, another state. It followed me home from that desert. And now I am its home. Because here's what I finally understand. That stretch of highway is not haunted by something in the desert. It is a doorway. And when you break down there, when you stand alone in that darkness feeling watched, something notices you. Something steps through. And it hitches a ride back to wherever you came from. The truly terrifying part is not that it followed me. It is that it is patient. It is not trying to hurt me or scare me away. It is settling in, making itself comfortable, learning my routines, my habits, the way I move through my own life. And every night it gets a little closer, a little bolder. Last night in this motel, I woke up to those footsteps again. In this room I have never been in before. In this town 100 miles from my house. The bathroom door was open and steam was pouring out, even though the water was not running. I looked in the mirror and I could see it behind me in the reflection. Tall, impossibly thin, covered in desert dust. Its face was too long. Its eyes too wide. Its mouth stretched in something that might have been a smile. I spun around. Nothing there, but I could still see it in the mirror, standing right behind where I was, reaching out a hand toward my shoulder. I do not know what happens when it finally touches me, when it finishes whatever process it started on that dark highway 3 weeks ago. But I know it is coming soon. I can feel it getting ready, getting excited. So if you ever break down on a lonely highway in the middle of the night, if you ever feel that unsettling sensation of being watched from the darkness, Listen to me. Do not wait for help. Start walking. Flag down the first car you see. Do whatever it takes to get away from that spot before something notices you. Because you might make it home safely. That is what happened to me. I made it home just fine. And that is exactly what terrifies me most. Story 10. Town that felt awake but empty. I should have trusted my gut when the GPS died exactly 3 miles before the exit. That unsettling silence when the screen went black, the way my phone refused to find any signal afterward. But I was exhausted, running on coffee and stubbornness after 16 hours behind the wheel, and the green highway sign promised gas and food at the next town. Millbrook, population 3,847. I had never heard of it, but at 2 in the morning, any place with working streetlights felt like salvation. The exit ramp curved down into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow my headlights. No reflectors, no signs, just cracked asphalt disappearing into a wall of trees that pressed close enough to scrape my mirrors. The kind of forest that feels too dense, too alive with things moving just beyond what you can see. I kept my speed steady, fighting the creepy sensation that something was pacing my car just inside that tree line, matching my velocity perfectly. Then the town appeared, not gradually, the way most places emerge from rural nothing. One moment there was only forest and night. The next, Millbrook spread before me like a stage set waiting for actors who would never arrive. Every streetlight burned with that sickly orange glow that makes everything look diseased. Every storefront window blazed with fluorescent brightness. The traffic light at Main Street cycled through red, yellow, green with mechanical precision. Cars sat parked along both sides of the street, positioned at perfect angles like someone had arranged them with a ruler. Through the windows of the diner, I could see lights illuminating empty booths and a counter with coffee pots still steaming on their burners. But nothing moved. Not a single person walked those illuminated sidewalks. Not one shadow crossed in front of those glowing windows. The horrifying rawness of it crawled up my spine like ice water. This was not a sleeping town. This was a town that felt awake but empty, as if I had arrived moments after something terrible had already happened. I stopped at the red light, even though no other cars waited anywhere. The engine idled. My hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to reverse, to flee back toward the highway, to drive until this place became nothing but a disturbing memory. But my gas gauge needle had been kissing empty for 20 miles, and the next town was another 40 beyond that. The gas station sat at the far end of Main Street, every pump light blazing in the darkness. I pulled in slowly, scanning for any sign of life. The convenience store interior glowed like a beacon, aisles of chips and candy bars visible through spotless windows. A small television mounted behind the counter flickered with what looked like the blue glow of late-night programming. The door stood slightly ajar. I filled my tank with my credit card, grateful I did not need to go inside. But as the numbers climbed on the pump display, I found myself studying the town with growing unease. Mailboxes stood with their flags raised. A sprinkler system rotated lazily in someone's front yard, casting water across grass that looked freshly mowed. Wind chimes hung motionless despite the breeze I could feel on my face. In one window, a television cast dancing light across empty furniture. The pump clicked off. I replaced the nozzle with hands that had started to shake, that awful fear building in my chest like pressure before a storm. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with Millbrook. The evidence was everywhere once you looked. A bicycle leaned against the diner wall, kickstand down, as if its rider had just stepped inside moments ago. A coffee cup sat on a bench, still wisping steam into the chilled night air. At the intersection, a purse lay in the crosswalk. Contents spilled across the pavement like someone had dropped it mid-stride and simply vanished. I should have left then. I should have climbed back in my car and driven until my engine died or the sun rose or I found another human being who could confirm I was not losing my mind. But that is when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost missed it beneath my racing heartbeat. Music, coming from somewhere deeper in town. Not the eerie silence of abandonment, but actual music. Slow, distorted, like a record playing at the wrong speed. I followed it. God help me, I followed it. Walking down those empty sidewalks under those sickly lights, past those glowing windows that revealed nothing but absence. Past the barber shop with its pole still spinning in hypnotic red and white spirals. Past the library where every light blazed and I could see books scattered across tables as if patrons had been interrupted mid-sentence and simply ceased to exist. The horrifying wrongness intensified with every step, but the music pulled me forward like a fishhook in my chest. The sound led me to a church. Small, white, perfect in that aggressive way old New England churches try to be. Every window glowed with warm light. The front door stood open, and from inside came that warped, unsettling music. Something familiar I could not quite place, corrupted into something that made my teeth ache. I climbed the steps, the wood creaked under my weight, the first natural sound I had heard since entering Millbrook. Inside, the pews sat empty but for hymnals placed at precise intervals, as if a congregation had been expected but never arrived. Candles burned along the altar, wax pooling onto the cloth in frozen waterfalls. And there, on a small table near the pulpit, an old record player spun with that terrible music leaking from its speakers. I approached slowly, that creepy sensation of being watched pressing against my back like cold hands. The record was unlabeled, just black vinyl spinning endlessly. When I lifted the needle, the silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. In that quiet, I heard something else. Breathing, slow, rhythmic, coming from somewhere beneath my feet. The church had a basement. I found the door behind the altar, standing open just wide enough to reveal darkness and wooden stairs descending into it. Every cell in my body shrieked against going down those stairs. But I heard the breathing again, multiple sources now, rising and falling in perfect synchronization. People were down there, had to be. The entire population of Millbrook, hiding from something or participating in something I could not yet comprehend. The stairs groaned under each footfall. The darkness was absolute, swallowing the weak light from my phone screen. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a smell I recognized but could not place. Something organic, something wrong. The breathing grew louder, that terrifying rhythm that was too perfect, too coordinated, like dozens of lungs moving as a single organism. The basement stretched before me, far larger than the church above could possibly contain. My phone light revealed only fragments, dirt floor, stone walls, and shapes, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing motionless in the shadows just beyond where my light could reach. The breathing came from them, in and out, perfect and horrible and inhuman in its precision. I stumbled backward, my light sweeping across the nearest shape, and for one horrifying second I saw a person, a man in work clothes, standing rigid, eyes open but seeing nothing, mouth slack, breathing in that awful synchronized rhythm. Not dead, not alive, something in between that defied every rule of nature I understood. I ran, up those stairs, through that church, out into the street where every light still burned and nothing moved and the town felt awake but empty because its people were all down there, breathing together in the dark. I sprinted for my car, keys cutting into my palm, my own ragged breathing breaking that terrible silence. The engine roared to life. I threw the car into drive and accelerated hard enough to leave rubber on the pavement. The town blurred past, those perfect streetlights, those glowing windows, those parked cars that I now realized all faced the same direction, toward the church, as if they had been driven there in some mindless pilgrimage. The forest closed in again. The darkness returned. I drove with my foot pressed to the floor, watching my rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit, any indication that something had noticed my intrusion. But Millbrook simply disappeared behind me as if it had never existed at all. I did not stop driving until the sun rose, when I finally found another town. A real town with people walking dogs and drinking coffee and living their normal, beautiful, terrifying lives. I pulled into a parking lot and sat shaking for 20 minutes. I tried to tell someone, anyone, about what I had seen. But when I pulled up maps on my phone, searching for Millbrook, I found nothing. No town, no exit, just an empty stretch of highway with forest on both sides. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder about all those people standing in that basement, breathing together in the dark. I wonder what they were waiting for, what they had become, and I wonder, with a fear that makes my chest tight and my hands shake, whether there are other towns like Millbrook scattered across this country. Places that feel awake but empty, where the lights burn but nothing moves, where something has already happened and we are all just waiting to discover what. I never took another night drive. I never trusted a GPS again. And I never, ever stopped at a town I had never heard of, no matter how desperately I needed gas. Because some places are not meant to be found, some emptiness is not meant to be filled, and some breathing is not meant to be heard. The shadow of that night follows me still. Every deserted street carries an echo of Millbrook. Every synchronized sound makes my skin crawl with memory. I am haunted not by what I saw, but by what I did not see. By the question that keeps me awake in the darkest hours, the question I can never answer. What was I breathing in down there, in that basement that should not exist? What did I carry out of Millbrook inside my lungs? And when I breathe late at night, alone in the silence, why does it sometimes feel like my rhythm is matching something far away, something patient, something waiting in a town where the lights still burn and nothing moves and everyone stands together in the dark, breathing, breathing, breathing as one? These stories don't end when the video does. They stay with you during the next quiet night. This channel isn't about one story. It's about every night after that. Subscribe.